Hey everyone, welcome back. And I've done a few changes to our dust sim, so I'll take you through that quickly. And I've done a flipbook as well, so we can see where that is. And we're basically wrapping up week 7 over here. So I'll just show you the dust for now, and then we can quickly add some shaders to these new layers we've done and set up a geometry light as well for the electro pass and do some test renders. So with that we'll end week 7 and we'll continue with this effect in week 8. So for starters, let's just take a look at my new dust here, and you'll see, well actually let me play the flipbook first so I can explain. So compared to the previous version, this is a higher res, so it took a fair amount of time to sim. It's still not extremely high because it's going to be pretty low density, so we don't need anything crazy. But I guess the first thing you'll notice compared to the previous version is I've pushed the velocities a lot more. And there's two things going on there. One is I liked the initial velocity and then the fact that it slowed down and then got pushed again, but I've actually done away with that in favor of a more continuous expansion. So I'll show you what I did for that, but it's more of just an on-the-fly creative choice, and I'd be interested to see some finished results that use different methods. Specifically, if you guys would like to try something like, if you've ever seen that nuclear explosion reference where the dust gets blown off of a house and then it gets blown back and then back off, that's something cool you can get just by messing around with this sim. In this case, I just want something expansive enough that it's constantly coming towards camera to try and make the shot just feel a little bit more like sort of action heavy. So that's what the dust is looking like at the moment. So if I just show you what I ended up doing here. For starters, I have our source with a lot more points. And that's more points on the scatter on the sphere itself. But then what I ended up doing is this attribute transfer from the environment to our source. I've got a pretty low number here, but there were still some gaps basically. And it doesn't really work to up the sample count to try and get rid of that, so I had to take the environment and the point cloud, and then what I did was I point replicated. So I went with 10 times more points in this point cloud and just rayed them back onto the environment. So the end result is just using the same point cloud, just getting a little bit denser on the point count. And that sort of helped the transfer make a very solid edge. You can still see kind of slightly blobby aspect there, but that kind of helped a little bit. Then we have all of this going on. Nothing changed there. I think I took off the boost on the velocity, and I instead just added a high velocity in the DOP. With something else as well. So that's our source going in. If I come back here, we jump into the DOP. My final res for that sim we just looked at was 0.2. And if we look here, I've actually dropped the velocity right back down and gone for a very high density to get some extra rolling. So just experiment with different densities. Again, I keep trying to get people to really experiment in the sort of like from a density value of 1 to like 1,000 and just see how it affects your sim, and you'll be quite surprised. After that, the normal collision, and then what I've done is added 2 fans. So fans, no one is using fans anymore except me, I guess, but it's if I need something very specific, a fan can do that job for me. So if I can just visualize these, So what I've done is I've taken one fan and I'm here just in the position of the fan, just referencing the centroid of my object merge for the drone itself. And I've set the angle to 180. So this fan's pointing up and its cone angle is 180, so it's pretty much covering the entire section above the center of the drone. And then I have a max distance of 25, so that's basically matching the distance of our source. So even if dust was sourcing over here, it would still get blown slightly outwards in the direction that the fan's pointing, with a pretty strong force per unit area set there. And then I've just made a second one that's in the same place, slightly underneath the other one. You can see it just there. And it's pointing down 180 degrees as well. Same max distance, same force. So the idea here is I've basically got a spherical force without using an expansion type force. I've just used fans and they're pushing out basically in every direction. And the reason I did that is because, like I said before, the velocity from the source was giving me a good initial push, but what I really wanted when looking at the shot over and over again is the dust to keep flowing towards the camera and out over past the trees, stuff like that. So I've added in the fans as an additional force to try and achieve that. And that's it. So I've written that out and there's our dust. So at the moment this is actually very dense. You can look at it there. Oh, I'm still getting some volume underneath there. So there's a big giant waste of simulation time. To avoid that, you just come in here to the resize container and make sure you have a boundary on -y. So if I just look at this over here, you can see that the density coming out of the sim is pretty extreme. And it's not particularly detailed in terms of the turbulence or anything, but there's quite a lot going on. And if I like the way it looks with such an extreme density, then it's only going to look better once we tone that down and knock it back. So this would be pretty funny in itself, but we still want to be able to see what's happening behind that dust. So that's what I have for the dust. So before we wrap this up, let's do a little bit of housekeeping and set up some extra render tests over here. So we'll start with electro and then we'll move on to dust. So we're just sticking with the mantra for every new element for this workshop. So in the electro we just need to have, we do want motion blur. I don't think I need any limits because this will be completely emissive. Probably need a high pixel samples because it's a very thin element. And I just need to force my electro. The rest of the stuff becomes a forced matte. And lights don't really matter. So that's the basic mantra for our electricity. And I'm going to copy and paste our shopnet from our arcs. So if you like, and sometimes I do this, I actually use just one shopnet here or material network on the object level. And then all of my effect shaders are stored in one place. But just for clarity for each one of these, because we're kind of sectioning this up into different layers. I'm just keeping it simple with each layer pointing to its very own shading network. Right, so there's the arcs applied to our electro. So let's do a render test. We just save quickly. Okay, it's taking a while. Seems to be doing some kind of pop simulation or something where I haven't written something out. So that's a great start. Oh, it's the wrong layer. It's electro. You can see I named it completely differently and yet still messed up and chose the wrong one. And there we go. So the width values on the polywire are not too different from the ones I used on the arcs, so should be happy with that. I think it's slightly thicker. The emissiveness is working. The resolution is just about right. If I push H here, and I can check the actual what we're dealing with in terms of samples, that seems fine. Width seems fine, and the alpha seems to be working as well. So all in all, that should be usable for comp. So one giant thing missing here is motion blur. So let me switch on velocity blur over here. Double check our mantra. It has motion blur. So let's do the thing that we did with the arcs as well. So we came here to our noise. We basically just take the same thing, the same noise, and we add it to velocity as well. I should probably pause before I carry on here. Right, so we're adding noise, the same noise to our velocity there, and we have this one over here as well. And then we might need to boost that over here like we did last time. Okay, it does seem to be working. So velocity times equals 10. It takes a while every time because it needs to do the polywire. Right, so now we're getting a little bit of blur there. I think I can boost it some more. Let's go with 20. We just want to make sure that nothing specifically feels like a solid line. And we can tell now I need to increase the samples in Mantra as well. Right, so something like that. That should give us some interesting blur as these lines are flickering around. So that's the electricity done. And I'm going to just quickly, well, you know what I'll do is I'll duplicate our environment EMP light here and just do electrolyte. So we don't have a light yet. Let's do that. Okay, so for starters, to avoid the need for super high samples like with the other ones, I'm actually gonna just duplicate this here. And make this slightly thicker. It can be slightly thicker than the rendered arcs. So let's just add a value. So we say it's alpha times 0.003 plus 0.003, so it's at least 6. So that will give us a little bit more room on the samples there for our geolight. And then I will just duplicate this one here. So we disable indirect again to speed it up. We have a physically correct here. I ended up adding this and setting it very large, so it's pretty much, it doesn't even need to be there. But the thing is, it does save render time. So at some point the effect that the light has on the environment is so minuscule that it doesn't exist in the render, and yet it still takes time to compute that. So it's good to have an active radius anyway. In terms of the electricity, we can go down to 5. And then I'll just point this at our electro. And we already have a blue value there, so let's see how that looks. Right, so in our electrolyte, we want the environment. We want the electrolyte here. Oh, I didn't rename it. The electrogeolight and nothing else. So our environment pass with the electricity will just have the light. And I need to remember to fix this before I render. This is the light that is affecting our environment from the shockwave, and I included the volume just because I was testing the render, so we don't want to do that. We just want the environment and the EMP geolight, and in the electro we just want the environment and we just want the electrogeolight. So that should work, except I need to force this. Alright, so let's quickly test that light out. Getting quite a few mantras here now. Why can't I find it? Here we go. So this light is pretty important, I think. So we'll get a separate geopass for that light on the environment, but we need to also include it in our dust. So we want our dust simulation to also be affected by this light. Okay, that's not bad. That's actually not bad for a first pass. But we shouldn't be seeing the electricity, but it's kind of useful. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Could once again just go higher values on the sampling there. It's really not too bad to render this. So now we just need to make sure we carry this light through onto any passes we want to have this super dynamic reactive geolight involved in. Right, so we've taken care of the electricity. Now let's do something quickly for the dust. Let's do a standard pyro. So a standard pyro shader there. We don't want this to be super dark, so I'm going to go with my default gray. Scattering phase, we don't know yet. I can never remember which direction, but I always adjust this especially when everything's backlit. Basically, I start to adjust this value and see what interesting results I can get. Smoke with density, and the only thing we want here is possibly to use the ramp so we can clamp our maximum. As I said, we have a super high density volume, so that will let us do that. So we'll apply that there. I actually want the motion blur on as well, but we need to be careful because volumes with motion blur can really hit you render time wise. With that in mind, I'm actually going to change the render visibility here to only primary and shadow, just to avoid anything else. Right, so there's our dust, and if we come back here just to make sure to our mantra, we have our dust. Good thing I checked. And we have some matte objects, and at the moment we've got the geolight from the EMP shockwave. So I'm going to render that first, and then I can do a comparison and add the electrolight as well. Another thing is, once I've checked that, I'll actually want to switch on all in the candidate lights, just to make sure that the dust is receiving the environment light and the spotlights I have as well. So this is why I switch off my geolights and just force them in the mantra. Okay, let's see how the dust looks. And my suspicion is between the dust and the shockwave volume, which is just that volume that fills the entire sphere. They're probably going to be the heaviest passes to render. So we'll see how that goes. Alright, so that's super dense. Let's just go back in here and drop this down. So something much more like that, and we can lower it in the comp as well, but you can't lower a super dense volume in the comp because it looks wrong. As soon as it's dense enough that you have a lit side and a shadowed side, and then you just drop that down in comp with the blend, that doesn't look right. If it's soft and low density enough that you don't actually get much lighting information in terms of shadows, then you've got some room to play with this in comp. So we can easily just gain that down in comp to where we're happy. Right, so at the moment this is only being lit by the actual light coming off of the shockwave spheres. So let's try add in our electrolight. I didn't really see a difference there. It might be too late. No, there should be something here. So we should see these lighting up the dust. So I'm not really seeing anything. I'm just going to speed this render up quickly for our testing. So I'll go half res and just really low on the pixel samples. So I'll just give it a second and see if I can pick out any of these lights. I can't really tell, there might be something there. Let me go ahead and switch them off again. I just want to be sure that everything is working correctly before we even think about setting up a render for this. Okay, that's definitely different. So it's slightly more blue. So if I check a few frames in a different section of the timeline here, hopefully I'll see some interaction between the electricity and the dust. So let's do that quickly now before I add all the other lights as well. Another thing I could try tweaking to make sure that we actually see that light is the scattering on the shader. Okay, so what's happening here is we've got quite a lot of volume in the scene. And it's pretty dark because, for one, we don't have the environment light on and we're relying on the arcs pretty much at this point. So let me just make sure that we're choosing a good frame. Okay, I just want to choose a frame that looks like it will have a lot of volume and a lot of light from the electricity here. The reason I want to add velocity blur, if I can, from a render time perspective, if I can actually get away with it, is because I have some pretty fast velocities in there, and I feel like it'll really add to the scene if all of these things are being affected by that shockwave, that they all feel properly blurred if they're reacting so quickly. So there's a lot of light back in the dust because of all the electricity happening here. So as far as I remember, so going a negative value will bounce less light off the front and allow more light through. So less light would bounce and more light will bleed through, which I think is what's happening here. So all that electricity behind is finding its way through the volume much more easily into the camera. And if I went with a positive value, if a light comes in from, say, where we are, it would reflect quite a lot of that light back out, which makes it feel more solid in terms of how much light can get through the volume. Okay, so maybe something like that. So it's not very easily lit, but there's a lot of light bleed inside this dust from all of our lights going on. But you can see this is by far taking longer than any of the other passes. So got to do everything we can here to speed this up. So maybe just remove any of these masks, make sure that our settings are as low as we can go. I might even say just do a final render of this at 2/3 instead of full res and just blow it up in comp. Also pixel samples probably maximum 3, and then just render it and hope for the best. So I'll let you know how my own rendering goes when we get there, but for now we've covered everything here for the electricity and for the dust. I think those passes are looking pretty cool. Let's not forget to quickly add all the lights to our dust. And then before we do any rendering or comping, let's carry on. There's a few more things we need. The one is the more magical effect I have in my mind, which is just an advection of points basically. And I think we'll try rasterizing that. And basically I'm hoping for like a sort of a swirly radial spherical ejection of magic feeling stuff that can interact with the ground and can really like influence the middle section of this effect. It's kind of easy for the whole wave to pass by the environment and the camera, and then you're left kind of wanting something lingering in this middle space. So we'll do that. And then I also want to add some more shading to our shockwave surface itself. So get some noise patterns in there, something we can use in comp to add some extra detail to the surface of the shockwave. So yeah, that's us for now, and that will be week 7 done. And I'll see you guys in week 8, where we'll wrap up this effect and get this into comping as well and finish this up. So I'll see you guys then.